Okay, welcome back everyone to your Philippine Politics and Governance. Again, this is Mr. Krippe Anthony E. Ramos, and for this session, we will be talking about the topic political ideology. So I am quite sure that you already heard the term ideology. So ideologies can actually mean different things to different people. See, for example, if we will be asking sociologist Peter Braham, he will actually stress the point that it is a set of beliefs that are more or less consistent with one another. This may also describe a cluster of beliefs that are not only judged false or distorted, but also as deliberately concealing some hidden interest. So if we will be talking about ideology in a political sense, we can actually define political ideology as a more or less coherent set of ideas that provides a basis for organized political action, whether the ideas are intended to preserve, modify, or overthrow the existing power structure. So madaling salita, class, if we're talking about political ideologies, now this would actually be your lenses in which you will be using this in order for you to actually gain your goal. So say for example, if your goal is to preserve the status quo or the current standing of your country or of a political community, definitely you will be using a distinct political ideology. But hindi lang ito tungkol sa pag-preserve ng kung ano yung meron tayong political structure. It can also use to modify and even overthrow an existing power structure. So class, according to Haywood, there are different characteristics of political ideologies. First, it offers an account of the existing order, often in the form of a worldview. Second, it also provides a model of a desired future, a vision of a good society. Third, it outlines how political change can and should be brought about. So just like what I've mentioned, class, your political ideologies will always serve as your lenses. That is why if you will be taking one lens, definitely you will have a different objective. So say for example, if you would want to gain or retain your status quo, or your current standing or your current power structure, definitely you will be choosing a political ideology or you are using a political ideology that would serve its purpose. Right? So let's go ahead now and have a look to the different political ideologies. So these are the most common political ideologies that are being talked about. So let's start with liberalism. So class, liberalism, so we are actually well aware of this because here in the Philippines, ito rin yung ginagamit nila no, or natin. So liberalism class is depending actually on the individual. So this would be the fulfillment of the individual through satisfaction of his interests. Okay? Individuals are also equipped with reason and equal opportunities under liberalism. There would also be a greatest latitude of freedom, and it will uphold meritocracy. So all of those bold words, okay? So definitely they are an essential element of liberalism. So let's go ahead and have a look on this one. So if we're talking about liberalism class, just like what I've told you, definitely it would give an emphasis on the individual and how you will be able to fulfill an individual's interest. So of course, you must go ahead and have a look through it individually and not by group. Okay? And also under liberalism, it has been said that individuals are actually capable of thinking, and since we are capable of thinking, we can reason out. And since we are already talking about liberalism, definitely all of those persons or all of those people, say for example, tayo ay nag-uphold ng liberalism, naniniwala tayo that individual has equal opportunity. So freedom has also been mentioned. So if we're talking about liberalism, of all the political ideologies, liberalism puts the greatest latitude of freedom. Ito yung nagbibigay ng ng kakayahan para sa mga liberal na bansa para actually maging maging malaya sa kung anong gusto nilang gawin. But later on, we will notice that itong kalayaan na ito ay hindi absolute kung tawagin. Pag sinabi natin absolute, hindi nangangahulugan na pwede mo nang gawin lahat. Of course, there would be limitation as to this one. Okay? But let's go first to meritocracy. If we're talking about meritocracy class, you are giving one's due, okay, depending on his contribution or kung ano yung nararapat sa kanya. Ang tinitignan mo rito ay kung paano ba siya nagpa-perform, ano ba yung contribution niya. So you are giving merit based on the contribution. Ano yung kaibahan ng meritocracy sa ibang bagay? So let me give you an example. Kung merong favoritism, definitely there would be no meritocracy. Kasi kung meron kayong pinapaboran based lang kung ikaw ay favorite or hindi, of course, there would be no meritocracy on that one. Okay? All right. So if we're talking about liberal democracy, there are actually twin values that we will be talking about. So just like the Philippines, no, we are upholding liberal democracy. And if we're talking about liberal democracy, there are two values. And since they are twins, no, hindi nyo siya pwedeng paghiwalayin. So the first one would be consent. If we're talking about consent class, it would imply freedom of choice. Pwede kang mamili. Meron kang kakayahan para mamili kung ano ba ang gusto mo. Whereas, if we're talking about constitutionalism, it would actually mean adherence and not merely lip of service but to rule of law. So ibig sabihin, ang ina-uphold natin sa constitutionalism, no, ay yung rule of law kung tawagin. So from the word itself, constitution, no, meron tayong batas at meron tayong sinusundan with regards into a liberal democracy. Right? So let's talk about the elements of liberalism. So we were already able to talk about individualism. So we put emphasis on the individual rather than group. We were also able to talk about freedom. Na sinasabi natin that liberalism would actually have the greatest latitude of freedom. No, may kalayaan yung mga tao under liberalism. Third, people are also equipped with reason. No, kaya daw nila magrason base sa kanilang gusto. Sinabi rin natin that all of the people has equal opportunity, so there is equality. So toleration class, definitely, no, since magkakaiba tayo ng ating gusto, and we want actually a community na kung saan matiwasay tayo naninirahan despite na meron tayong pagkakaiba-iba, dumarating tayo sa mga pagkakataon na tinotolerate natin yung isa't isa. Or if we're talking about toleration in Filipino, kinukonsente natin. Bakit? Because we would want to assure individual liberty and social enrichment that even though iba yung kanyang paniniwala or iba yung kanyang gusto, pwede pa rin niya ma-uphold yun kahit hindi natin siya gusto. Okay? Kinukonsente natin na while it is true na hindi natin tanggap, no, kinukonsente pa rin natin so that we can actually live in a harmonious relationship towards one another. Okay? We were already able to discuss about consent, and this would actually this would actually mean that you have a freedom of choice. And lastly, constitutionalism, and under constitutionalism, we are already talking about the adherence to the rule of law. Right? So if we're talking about liberalism class, I would want you to remember the following. First one would be individual is greater than social group. So we put emphasis on the individual's interests. Second, inconvenience to other person's rights, say for example, life, liberty, and property, may preclude one to exercise freedom. So yun yung sasabi ko kanina. If say for example, commit ka ng isang bagay na inconvenient for other person's rights. So say for example sa kanyang buhay, no, sa kanyang kalayaan or sa kanyang mga pagmamay-ari, definitely pwede kang hindi makapag-exercise ng same rights. It's simply because gusto natin magkaroon ng social enrichment kung tawagin. All right? Critical thinking is also essential in solving dilemmas. That is why class, I repeatedly saying to you na yung lahat ng inyong opinion, lahat ng inyong puro-puro, iyan ay mahalaga sa isang liberal na bansa. Bakit? Kasi naniniwala ang mga liberal na kung saan ang mga tao daw nila, no, ay critical thinkers. Na kung merong mga problema dyan, no, it is better to have a lot of options and a lot of reasons so that we can solve a single problem. All right? And every person has the same opportunities. All right, few other points. Toleration is equal to liberation and social enrichment. Social contract is built upon individuals' consent. Constitution guarantees respect for individual rights. That is actually included in your Bill of Rights or your Article 3 of your 1987 Constitution. All right? So class, let me go back to the social contract. Since we're talking about social contract class, no, kagaya ng isang kontrata, nagkakaroon dito ng kasunduan actually yung individual at saka yung state. But later on, we'll be talking about that. All right? So there are two school of thoughts na i-discuss ko sa inyo rin with regards to liberalism. The first one would be classical liberalism. So if we're talking about classical liberalism class, it views government interference as unhealthy and destructive economy. So kailangan, according to sa mga classical na mga liberal, dapat daw walang pangingialam ang gobyerno sa lahat ng bagay, no? None at all. Whereas, if we're talking about modern liberalism or the neoliberals, they believe that unregulated capitalism will rise or will give rise to injustices. So, class, if pag-uusapan natin ang modern or also known as the neoliberals, they would tell you na hindi pwedeng hindi mangialam ang gobyerno. Sinasabi nila na tama, no, dapat hindi nangangialam yung gobyerno. Pero there are actually some situations na i-regulate dapat daw ng gobyerno yung market so that there would be no injustices. Yun yung pinagkaiba ng dalawa. Classical liberalism will tell you na dapat none at all yung pangingialam ng gobyerno. Whereas, if we're talking about neoliberals, they will tell you that there should be a regulation at least, no, kahit kakonti lang, so that there would be no injustices. Okay? All right. We were already able to talk about social contract kanina, no? So there are actually different versions of social contract, but let's go ahead and talk about some. Okay? I'll be talking about two of the version of social contract. Let's begin with Thomas Hobbes. So according to Thomas Hobbes, all human beings are exclusively self-interested but rational. Of the voluntary acts of every man, the object is some good to himself. But men are still rational in pursuing their interests. They give up their freedoms to a third party for peace and survival. So say for example, scouts and spies. The political state is an artificial monster, also called as the Leviathan, which stands between us and the state of nature. So if we will be talking about the state of nature according to Thomas Hobbes, this is actually a situation wherein life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So if we're talking about Thomas Hobbes' version of social contract, naniniwala siya na lahat ng tao ay masama, no? Pinanganak silang masama, pero they are actually capable of thinking pa rin, no? So bakit sinabing masama? Kasi lagi daw iisipin ng tao kung ano ba yung makakabuti sa kanya. Gagawin niya ang lahat para mapabuti siya. That is why, according to Thomas Hobbes, and even dun sa kanyang sa kanyang work na Leviathan, Leviathan class is actually a monster. Okay? So, going back, it's a monster na kayang-kayang kumain or kumatay ng tao. So, bakit hinalian tulad ni Thomas Hobbes yung political state into a Leviathan? It is simply because dahil nga meron tayong iba't ibang interest sa bawat isa, no? Definitely kailangan natin na magre-regulate sa atin. And according to Thomas Hobbes, para mapigilan natin sarili natin na gawin kung ano ba yung gusto natin kahit na mali na, kailangan daw natin ng political state or ng isang estado, which is compared to a Leviathan. Okay? So, let's continue. Due to the state of nature, man is all too willing to submit to political authority. Sabi ko nga kanina, dahil nga meron tayong iba-ibang mga gusto at gusto natin mamuhay ng matiwasay, kailangan daw natin at willing daw tayo na mag-submit sa isang political authority na susunod tayo. Okay? This can actually be compared to Big Brother or si Kuya sa PBB, na kung saan pinagmamasdan tayo sa bawat gagawin natin. Tama pa ba yung ginagawa natin or meron tayo na violate? So definitely, according to Thomas Hobbes, we are willing to submit so that we can actually gear away from our state of nature. Okay? This is also to avoid a state of perpetual and avoidable war because class, sabi ni Thomas Hobbes, if wala tayong political state, definitely magkakaaway-away at magkakagulo lang tayo. Okay? 7, the social contract derives from the fear of chaos and brutality of men and force to bestow power to a sovereign to escape this. So, nabanggit natin siya kanina. Okay? So that would actually be class the social contract according to Thomas Hobbes. So just remember that according to Thomas Hobbes, the state of nature of man would actually be negative, negative. So if we're talking about Thomas Hobbes, lagi yung sasabihin na masama ang tao because they actually give interest or they give emphasis on the self-interest of men and women. Okay? If we will be comparing John Locke's idealism or the version of John Locke according to him, social contract, so we'll talk about the two treatises of government. So the first treatise would tell you na dapat daw nating i-reject yung political authority na yung concept na yung political authority ay nanggagaling sa divine right of king. So class, to give you an insight, according to the divine right theory, at ito yung laging ina-uphold dati ng mga monarchs, yung mga hari at reyna. So if we're talking about John Locke, sabi niya, kailangan daw nating i-reject yung idea na lahat daw ng kapangyarihan ng hari ay nanggaling sa may kapal. Kasi class, bakit nagkaroon dati ng monarkiya or ng monarchy? It is simply because naniniwala sila sa divine right theory. And divine right theory will tell you na walang ibang pinanggalingan yung kakayahan ng hari or yung kapangyarihan ng hari at reyna, kundi kay God lang. So kapag ikaw halimbawa ay nagreklamo or hindi sumunod sa hari at reyna, ibig sabihin nun, hindi mo rin sinusunod kung ano nga ba yung gustong mangyari ng Diyos. So with that, so class, definitely yung mga tao, hindi sila nag-aalsa laban sa hari at reyna. That's why, according to John Locke, we must reject that. That's the first treatise of government according to him. Second, so he would actually justify a civil government. If we're talking about civil government class, wala dapat pakikialam yung simbahan. Dapat daw kung kagaya sa sa Biblia daw, kung ano yung kay Caesar. Ibig sabihin, kung ano yung gusto mangyari ng gobyerno, yun yung dapat masunod kasi yun yung para sa gobyerno. At para yun sa mga sibilyan. So ibang sense daw yun pag pinag-usapan na natin yung religion. So doon nagsimula, class, yung paniniwala na dapat magka-separate yung church and state because John Locke would push for independence of civilian government and into an ecclesiastical government which is being run by our clergy. Okay? So according to John Locke, class, the state of nature is different from Hobbes, one that is a state of perfect liberty to pursue their lives without interference from others. We have God-given natural rights to life, health, liberty, and possessions according to John Locke. Okay? So, class, if we're talking about John Locke, no, naniniwala siya na ang tao ay mabubuti. No? Unlike kay Thomas Hobbes na naniniwala na masama tayo. According to John Locke, ang kailangan daw natin actually ay konting guidance lamang. Bakit? So, according kay John Locke, that even though we have a good state of nature, pinanganak ka daw na mabuti, mayroon pa rin mga pagkakataon na magkakaroon tayo ng dispute or mga problema. At ang pinaka-point out niya rito ay yung pagmamayari. Okay? Yung property. So commonly daw kasi gusto nating umangkin ng mga property, no, na kahit mabait tayo pagdating sa property, and most likely naman ito yung nakikita na papansin natin pag nakahawak na tayo halimbawa ng mga ng mga pagmamay-ari, nagkakaroon tayo ng problema. So in order for us to avoid that, it is necessary to have authority. Okay? So it's a state of so yan nga sinabihan kanina. Okay, let's continue. All right. So families agreeing to come together and give executive power to punish transgressor. So ibig sabihin, dahil nga magkakaroon daw tayo ng problema pagdating sa pagmamay-ari, nagkasundo do yung mga magkakapamilya para magkaisa in order for us to put the executive to put executive power para magkaroon daw tayo ng kapangyarihan para panagutin yung mga magmamalabis or transgressors kung tawagin. Okay? They would also form into a one body politic under one government. So dahil nga gusto nilang sumunod at magkaroon ng pagkakaisa, magkakaroon daw tayo ng isang gobyerno. For John Locke, people would submit themselves to a government for as long as it secures their natural rights and promote public good. Okay? If government devolves into tyranny, then the people can stage a justifiable revolution in order to return to the state of nature. So class, yan yung sinasabi ko kanina, dahil nga ito ay social contract, nagkakasundo yung individuals at yung government na magkaroon ng matiwasay na pamumuhay. So ano yung ginagawa? So yung individuals, sinusuko nila yung kanilang karapatan sa gobyerno at kapalit nito, kailangan daw pangalagaan ng gobyerno yung kapakanan natin. Now, according to John Locke, kung sakaling yung gobyerno ay maging diktador, maging tyrannical, umaabuso sa kanyang kapangyarihan, kailangan daw magkaroon daw ng revolution or pinapayagan daw yung mga tao na magkaroon ng revolution para mabawi yung kanilang karapatan mula sa gobyerno. At actually class, mapapansin natin ito sa mga pinagdaanan nating EDSA. Okay? So EDSA People Power 1, say for example, dahil nagkaroon daw ng tyranny, if we will be putting the concept of John Locke, dahil nga nagkaroon ng pagmamalabis, nagkaroon ng diktador, hindi na sumusunod sa kung anong gusto ng tao, pwede daw mag-stage ang mga tao ng isang revolusyon, justifiable revolution, para daw mapabalik tayo sa ating state of nature na pagiging mabuti. And yun yung naging sanhi ng pagbagsak din ni Marcos. Say for example, binawi daw ng tao yung social contract na kanilang ibinigay sa kanya. And that is why class, if you can still remember, nagkaroon tayo ng pagbawi ng konstitusyon at nagkaroon tayo ng period of time na nagkaroon tayo ng nagkaroon tayo ng panandaliang konstitusyon. Okay? So napalitan 'yon at some point lang naman. All right? So we're done with liberalism. Let's talk about another political ideology. It is also called as your conservatism. So if we're talking about conservatism class, this would actually want to preserve the status quo and the institution. Kung yung liberalism class, they would want always to have reforms. Conservatism would tell you that we must preserve the status quo. Okay? And it is actually a political ideology that would tell you that we must be skeptical to change. Why? Because we must adhere to the precautionary principle. Class, precautionary principle will tell you that if you are not sure on something, do not do it. So sa Filipino, kung hindi ka sigurado, wag mo na siyang ituloy. Bakit mo siya hindi itutuloy? It is simply because baka mapahamak ka lamang according sa mga conservative. Yun nga yung dahilan class kung bakit yung mga konserbatibo natin ng mga ng mga politiko, lagi yung skeptical sa technology. Bakit? Because they would want to retain kung ano daw yung meron dati. No? So if you are a liberal, definitely magka-clash kayo ng conservative as to your idea. Okay? All right. So according to conservatives, authority is also equal to social cohesion. Magkakaroon daw ng isang matiwasay na pamumuhay kung meron daw tayong isang malakas na mamumuno sa atin according to conservatives. Now, let me present to you the different elements of conservatism and let's discuss this one by one. Class, the first one would be tradition. So, defense of tradition, class, is an important theme upheld by your conservatives. Okay? To them, tradition, time-tested values, practices, and institution reflect the accumulated wisdom of the past. So that is why, class, they would tell you na mas maganda na sundin natin kung ano yung nakaraan dahil tradition na ito. No? Pragmatism, class, conservatives frown on abstract principles and systems of thought because of the perceived limits of human rationality. So with this, they place their faith on experience, history, and even the belief that practical circumstances and practical goals should control human action. That's pragmatism. Human imperfection, class. So according to the conservatives, human beings are weighed down by imperfections. Individuals are actually dependent and seek security in the familiar and the known. And since tayo nga raw ay hindi perfecto, class, conservatives will always tell you that it is more important na magkaroon daw tayo ng basis. Kung ano yung nakasanayan na natin at ano yung na tayo, no, nakagawian natin, definitely mas maganda daw yung nasundin. Okay? Organicism, class, conservatives theorize that society is an organic whole which exists as something that is more than the sum of its individual parts. No, in contrast with liberalism, class, naniniwala ang mga conservatives na mas okay daw kung magkaroon daw ng ng emphasis doon sa buong society instead of the individual. Hierarchy, on the other hand, class, an organic society na kung saan pinerceive ng ating mga konserbatibo, it is being characterized by hierarchy of position. So individuals occupy different positions in society because they perform different roles and responsibilities. Plus, if you will still remember, no, and if napag-usapan niyo na yung hierarchy, meron daw mataas, meron daw mas mababa. And according to conservatives, maganda daw ito. Bakit? Kasi kaya siya na mas mataas or mas mababa, it is simply because they have different roles and responsibilities to perform. So pangit daw according to mga conservatives kung pare-pareho tayo or magkakapantay tayo ng posisyon. No? And that is the reason kung bakit kailangan daw may hierarchy according to your conservatives. Authority, class, so sabi ko nga kanina, authority would produce social cohesion. It will always give the individuals a clear sense of who they are and what is expected from them. Although there is freedom, it must go hand in hand with responsibility, just like what I mentioned earlier. Okay? So property, the last one, it is important to conservatives, class, because it provides security to people. It also gives people some amount of independence from the government and encourage them to be law obedient and respectful for the property of others. So class, those would be your elements of conservatism. So few points to be remembered sa conservatism. Change will result to uncertainty. That's why they are skeptical to change. Practical goal and practical action would always be prioritized according to conservatives. Humans are imperfect, so that's why strong state will maintain order. So if we will be talking about the difference between liberalism and conservatism, it is imperative for us to look to the human nature, state, society, and attitude towards change. As to the human nature, liberals will tell you that humans are moral and rational, but conservatives will tell you that individuals are dependent and morally corrupt. As to the state, there would be limited government diffusion of government power, but there is human rights according to the liberals. But according to the conservatives, there must be a strong state which would impose strict laws and harsh penalties. As to the society, liberal society would have a diverse, marami daw yung pagkakaiba-iba. But conservatives would actually have an entirety and have shared values. And lastly, class, if we're talking about the attitude towards change, liberals will tell you that they are more open to radical change, whereas conservatives would actually tell you that even though that they are open to reform, there would be a slower change. Okay? All right. So let's go ahead now and discuss about socialism and communism. So this is actually being interchanged, no, at karaniwan itong tinatanong ko ano yung pinagkaiba nila. But let's go ahead and discuss this. Socialism and communism, class, is actually being offered as an alternative to capitalism, or kung ano yung meron tayo ngayon, yung isang kapitalistang bansa. Central government plans the economy. It gives emphasis to the workers, and people own the factors of economic production. So let's go ahead and discuss kung ano ba pinagkaiba nila kasi ito yung madalas na tinatanong, ano? Socialism gives individuals the capacity to gain personal assets, but industrial and production capacity is communally owned and managed by democratically elected government. Communism also gives the state control over economic resources in the country. So everyone will receive goods, but it is being dependent on their basic human needs. No matter who they are or what they contribute in the production, they are at no charge. Whereas socialism distributes it according to individual ability and contribution. So class, again, if we're talking about communism, ang sasabihin niyan sa inyo, dapat pantay-pantay regardless kung ano yung kanyang contribution. But yung socialism will tell you that there must be an emphasis kung ano nga ba yung kanilang abilidad at ano ba yung kinocontribute nila. Socialism class would also allow freedom of religion, whereas communism would effectively abolish religion. Okay? So now let's go ahead and talk another ideology na kung saan lagi siyang ikinukumpara sa socialism and communism, but mas madalas sa communism. So class, actually, Marxism is the theory whereas communism is the application. So parang pag pinagkumpara mo silang dalawa, ang nasa isipan or yung theory kung tawagin, yung tinuturo halimbawa sa eskwelahan ay Marxism. Pero pag in-apply mo na ito into action, that would be called as communism. But both of them give some emphasis to the class struggle na meron daw laging laban ang mga naghaharing uri or yung mga bourgeois at yung mga pinaghariang uri kaya ng mga proletariat, no? So bakit daw nagkakaroon ng problema? It is simply because of the class struggle. Hindi raw matapos-tapos yung pakipaglaban ng mga proletariat sa mga bourgeois or mga burgis kung tawagin. Okay? Now, anarchism. Anarchism is any form of according to anarchism, any form of political authority is undesirable. Government promotes ignorance and dependence. That is why sinasabi nila na mas maganda na walang gobyerno. But with this one, all over the world, there is actually no known anarchist party to won on a national level. Karaniwan silang nasa local level kung nananalo sila. Okay? Fascism naman class, it would desire an organically unified national community, and class, ang mga pasista lagi nilang iniisip na merong messianic leader kung tawagin. Yung messianic leader, ito yung karaniwan na sinasabi ng tao na siya yung magliligtas sa atin. Na say for example, si Duterte, nung nampanya siya, kung naniniwala yung mga tao na siya yung or naniniwala mismo si Duterte, siya yung magliligtas sa Pilipinas, siya yung magbibigay ng mga nararapat para sa bansa, definitely he is a messianic leader, and that is under fascism. And class, under fascism, freedom is complete submission and democracy is dictatorship. So pinagbaliktad nila. So ibig sabihin pag ang isang tao naniniwala na kapag kapag merong dictatorship or pag sinasabi nila okay lang yung pagiging diktador, definitely they are gearing towards the concept of fascism. All right? So let's go ahead and compare socialism, communism, and fascism. So these are the differences. So I've divided it. So according to government role and economy, government power or control, and private property. Under socialism, it directly controls means of production or economic processes. Whereas if we're talking about communism, there must be stateless society, no need everything owned and collectively. And fascism, there is an indirect control of private businesses and means of production. Government power or control, according to socialism, it may result in a totalitarian or dictatorship. So pag sinabi mo totalitarian, meron lang isang tao or grupo ng tao na namumuno. Okay? Communism, it is gearing towards being stateless. So fascism, there is also a totalitarian and dictatorship. Private property, pwede daw ba mag-own yung mga tao? According to socialism, yes, but only consumer goods. Communism will tell you that no, there should be no private property. Kailangan daw kasi lahat ay para sa gobyerno or sa bansa. And fascism would tell you that there must be a mechanism para magkaroon ng private property. Alright? So, that would be all for our session. So that has been your political ideologies. And let me grab the opportunity again to thank everyone for attending this session. And I'm looking forward to see you on our upcoming sessions. Thank you, everyone.